Welcome to OSBA's Legal Ledger Sidebar. I'm Senior Communication Manager Scott Gerfen. Thanks for tuning in. Ohio's bathroom bill takes effect February 25th, 2025. And I know our legal and policy teams have been getting a lot of questions already about this bill, which is why I invited on Sara Clark, our Chief Legal Counsel, and our policy guru, as I like to call her, Kenna Haycox. So Sara, let me start with you. If you could just explain, this is going to impact pretty much every district in some way, right?
Yeah.
Explain, it's Senate Bill 104, but obviously known as the bathroom bill. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, sure. So it does basically four things. So the first thing it does, it's going to require school districts to designate certain facilities for single-sex use. It's going to prohibit districts from allowing members of one biological sex to use a facility that's designated for the opposite biological sex. Biological sex is defined in the statute. It's a long definition, but check it out. And then it prohibits the use of what are called multi-occupancy facilities. It prevents those from being labeled as non-gendered, multi-gendered, or open to all genders. And then the last thing it does is it prohibits schools from allowing a member of one biological sex to share overnight accommodations with a member of the opposite biological sex.
So what would be an example of that?
That comes up sometimes with trips to Washington, D.C. or
Right.
sport events that maybe are overnight in another state.
Right. So you say facilities. So we're not just talking about school bathrooms.
No, so the statute extends to beyond just bathrooms. It includes locker rooms, changing rooms, shower rooms, if those are still a thing that kids do in middle school and high school. But most importantly, what we're talking about are the multi-occupancy. That's the language that they use. Those multi-occupancy facilities, meaning they're accessible to multiple individuals at the same time. So family restrooms, single toilet, single shower facilities, those are not covered or those are not affected by Senate Bill 104.
Kenna, are there any exceptions where someone can use a facility that's designated for the opposite sex?
Yes, the bill does provide some clear exceptions for schools that are important to be aware of. So the first of those is recognizing that some students who are a little younger, let's say they're at a sporting event or something, they may have a need to have a parent of the opposite gender assist them. So one of the first exceptions is that if it's a child under the age of 10 and they're being assisted by a parent, guardian, or family member, that student and that person providing assistance can be in a facility that is of the opposite biological sex. The second is they also recognize that individuals with disabilities may have a need for assistance. So in that case, that's another exception where that individual, as well as the person providing assistance, can be in that facility. And then the other one is an individual whose job duties require the employee to enter the facility designated for the opposite biological sex. And then the fourth one that is a clear exception is if somebody enters it because they reasonably believe it's necessary to respond to a legitimate emergency. It's also important to know that the bill makes it clear that even though it's not necessarily an exception, that there may be times that a school may establish a policy providing an accommodation, such as access to a single occupancy facility or controlled use facility at the request of a student due to special circumstances. So that's still an option there.
So Sara, give me an example of a third exception. When might an employee's job duties require them to enter a facility? When I think about this, I think about, my father was a girls' basketball coach, so he would enter the girls' locker room at times.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, right? So if you have a girls' basketball coach who maybe needs to go into the locker room either before the game starts or at halftime to do your coaching, your supervising duties, that would be an example of a situation like that. The other one that I sort of thought of was, you may have custodial or facility maintenance staff who needs to access that to, do their responsibilities of cleaning or maintaining the facility. So what I would encourage districts to do between now and the effective date of the bill is to take a look at those job descriptions for the individuals who might fall into those categories and make sure that you have the language that you need as a district to show that that employee was required to enter the facility that was designated for the opposite biological sex.
So this bill here in Ohio, there are other bills across the nation that are very similar to this, right?
Yeah.
And they already facing legal challenges, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that there are about 12 that have already been passed, very similar to Senate Bill 104. Obviously, there's some differences between them, but same general concept. And you're right, some of those have faced legal challenges. I think in October of 2023, the Ninth Circuit actually blocked enforcement of an Idaho law that was similar to Senate Bill 104. I am not aware of any challenges that have currently been filed against the bill. I know that there are a couple of groups. The ACLU of Ohio is one that has said, we're monitoring this, we're looking, exploring options. And so it's possible that we'll see some litigation even before the bill becomes effective.
So what about possible challenges at the local level, the district level?
Yeah, I think once the bill becomes effective in February, too, you may also see some litigation that comes up or lawsuits being filed based off of how the district implements this. And I think you could see that in two different areas. So if a district doesn't comply with the requirements, you could see litigation or a lawsuit filed for, alleging that the district didn't comply with this state law. The bill doesn't have specific enforcement mechanisms or penalties spelled out within the language. And so, there's some question about what happens if a district doesn't comply with this or is found non-compliant. I think if a district does comply, you may also see litigation in this area. This even prior to Senate Bill 104, a lot of districts face lawsuits that allege that, the district violated federal anti-discrimination laws, and that includes Title IX. We have active and we have pending cases in the Sixth Circuit that support the ability of transgender students to use restrooms that align with their gender identity. That is certainly a focus of the Title IX regulations that came out as well. And those are on hold in Ohio, but certainly something we want to watch and take a look at. And so I think both of those things make it interesting and difficult for a district to sort of figure out what route they want to take, and is something that they'll need to work through with their board counsel.
So obviously, we here at OSBA like to make sure our members are prepared for when legislation like this takes effect. Kenna, what are some proactive steps the districts can take between now and February 25th?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is just clear communication and open communication with their school community. Recognizing this impacts all aspects of the school, individuals coming into the school as well. And so we recommend that districts have those conversations, explain what the law requires, outline it, make sure they're aware of that and how the district is complying with the law, and then also just provide reassurances similar to how they have in the past about working with individual students to meet needs. And then also just having those conversations with legal counsel early about compliance while minimizing risk is also a critical aspect of the next steps moving forward for district.
So Sara, I know like you get administrator, board member, they get this legislation, the wording of it, they pray, that's too long.
Yeah.
But you feel like it's important that districts do need to read this.
Yeah, I would start with that. Certainly, read the bill, understand what it says. There, like I mentioned at the beginning, there are some definitions in here that maybe don't align with what you think the word should be defined as. So checking those definitions out and making sure you're clear on what those include. I get that maybe not everybody wants to read legislation. And so if you're looking for a summary, OSBA has done a really nice summary of this. It's from December 1st, the legislative blog post. Nicole Piscatani did a nice job of sort of bulleting out some of the Act's requirements.
This is with our legislative team?
Yes. So check that out. Encourage you to, familiarize yourself with what it includes, certainly.
And Kenna, I believe you're telling your policy members as well, right?
Yeah, and so I think this is an area where it's important to understand all aspects of the term policy. And so at OSBA, we don't have a bathroom board policy for our members, right? And districts often work with students on an individual basis in situations like this as well. And so from the perspective of OSB's policies, really there's no policy changes. What we do encourage districts to do is to review locally adopted policies closely with legal counsel. So just to ensure that if there's anything specific in this area as it relates to the intersection of gender identity and use of facilities, that the standards and expectations set in their either board policies or potentially handbooks or district level policies align with the law and work through that. We also recommend encouraging that regular communication with staff about how to manage that, how to manage questions, who to direct them to if there's questions, make sure administrators understand, and then, continue to say, hey, if we have an individual student, kind of one of those references that might need to use a single stall area, what would we do on that in that area?
I imagine there's probably going to be there probably are going to be a lot of staff members who are going to be either confused or need to understand this, and that's going to be a challenge, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a lot of that practice and just making sure that you're prepared. And I think one of those things too is looking at how your buildings are set up. And, Sara, I know you and I were talking about kind of what districts should do about like adjusting signs.
Yeah.
And you had some good thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, the bill requires you, as we talked about earlier, to sort of designate certain facilities for single-sex use. So that is not only required in your school buildings, but also any facility that's being used for school-sponsored events. And so that is going to require you to sort of plan, look at your signs, look at what currently is being used. And again, having those conversations now and figuring out, okay, well, what are we going to do when the visiting team is here and maybe needs to use the opposite gender locker room? How do we temporarily put up a sign, or what does that look like in our district? So start thinking about what that means for your district. How you're going to go about making those designations, I think, is key. And then the other thing, just as sort of other things to think about between now and February, you may have accommodations as a district that you're currently providing for transgender students in your district that conflicts now with what the language is in 104. So it's Senate Bill 104. And so I cannot understate the importance of working with board counsel to review those accommodations that you're providing, especially if they currently allow, restroom or overnight accommodation access that is consistent with the student's gender identity. Just sitting down to talk through what that looks like for that individual student and how you're going to make modifications if necessary to those accommodations.
Any final thoughts? Like you said, it's possible this could face legal challenges, but as of now, it is due to take effect February 25th of next year.
That's right. And, I just encourage districts to stay informed. Don't hesitate to reach out to OSBA, Kenna, myself, anybody in our teams, or your legal counsel for guidance on this. This is a sort of ever-evolving area of the law. And so, we're here to help and sort of help guide you as you implement this and, address these questions in your district.
And don't forget, if you're an OSBA member, you do have access to our legal hotline, which is, Sara?
That is 855 OSBA Law.
You had to think about that.
I did.
And if you subscribe to our policy services, which is a separate subscription, you have access to our policy team in Kenna. And if you're not subscribed, you should get subscribed.
Yeah, we'd love to have a conversation with you.